Amazing flash mob leaves Londoners speechless. The bustling streets of London were alive with the rhythm of 1,000 voices. The early spring sun bathed the city in a golden glow, casting long shadows between the towering buildings that lined Oxford Street. London was never truly quiet, always humming with the energy of its diverse population. It was a city that lived in the moment, caught between the echoes of history and the pulse of modernity. But today, something extraordinary was about to unfold, a spectacle that would shake the very foundations of this lively metropolis. As commuters hurried along the pavements, their footsteps quick and purposeful, the faintest whisper of excitement began to spread through the crowd. Something was coming, though no one quite knew what it was. Londoners, ever alert to the hum of urban life, could feel it in the air, an electric charge that made the everyday feel just a little bit different. The heart of the city pulsed with anticipation as people made their way through the maze of shops, cafes, and buskers. The constant honking of taxis, the hurried steps of tourists, and the distant chime of Big Ben created a familiar symphony of city sounds. Yet today, the sound of something unexpected, something magical, was about to overtake it all. In the midst of this ordinary chaos stood Clara, a woman whose life was about to take an extraordinary turn. Clara Williams was just another face in the crowd, a 27-year-old graphic designer from Islington who had moved to London a few years ago in search of a fresh start. She loved the vibrancy of the city, the endless possibilities it offered, yet there was always something that felt a little off. Maybe it was the feeling of being lost in the crowd, of blending in without making an impact. Or maybe it was the hum of ambition that never seemed to quiet the voice in her head telling her she wasn't doing enough with her life. Clara had always been an observer. She found herself fascinated by people, by the way their eyes lit up when they saw something beautiful, by the laughter that echoed down the streets when friends gathered in the warmth of a cafe, by the quiet moments of reflection when a commuter paused to look out the window of a bus. She could spend hours sitting in a park, watching strangers, feeling like an outsider looking in. But there was one thing that Clara longed for above all else, to be a part of something bigger. Something that would make her feel alive, something that would give her a sense of belonging. She had always admired the flash mobs that went viral on social media, those unexpected, spontaneous moments where strangers came together to create something beautiful. They seemed to capture the essence of what it meant to truly live in the moment. Clara dreamed of being part of one, to have the courage to step out of her comfort zone and embrace the thrill of the unexpected. As she strolled along Regent Street that afternoon, Clara was on her way to a cafe to meet her best friend, Emily. They had been planning this catch-up for weeks, and Clara couldn't help but smile at the thought of the afternoon ahead. Emily had been her constant companion through thick and thin, offering support when Clara had doubts and always pushing her to step outside her comfort zone. Unbeknownst to Clara, today would be the day her dream would collide with reality. In the midst of the crowd, she noticed something strange. A group of people, dressed in casual clothes, but with an energy that felt out of place, were gathering near the base of a famous statue, a spot where street performers often set up their acts. They were positioned in a loose circle, as though waiting for something, yet there was no sign of what they were preparing to do. Clara's curiosity piqued, but she shrugged it off, thinking it was just another group of buskers or actors preparing for a show. But then, the first note of music pierced the air, a sudden, unexpected swell of sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The group of people who had until then been standing still began to move in perfect unison, their steps crisp and synchronized. The sound of a lively pop song reverberated through the square, and Clara's heart skipped a beat. She stood frozen for a moment, captivated by what she was witnessing. Within seconds, it became clear that this was no ordinary street performance. The flash mob had begun. The music grew louder, the energy more contagious. More dancers, dozens of them, some blending in seamlessly with the crowd, others emerging from nowhere, joined in, turning what was once a quiet corner of London into a living, breathing spectacle. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she watched in awe, her eyes darting between the performers, trying to follow each flawless movement. The dancers were all ages, from teenagers to middle-aged adults, and their energy was infectious, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. But what struck Clara the most wasn't just the choreography, it was the look in the performers' eyes. They were completely lost in the moment, as though nothing else existed outside of the dance, as though they had been waiting for this very moment their entire lives. The crowd around them began to swell, drawn by the infectious energy. People stopped in their tracks, phones raised, capturing the magic unfolding before them. Clara felt a deep sense of longing stir within her chest. The kind of longing that made her want to be part of something bigger, something that transcended the everyday. This wasn't just a flash mob, this was a shared experience, a brief moment of unity in a city that so often felt fragmented. But as Clara watched, a shadow crossed her mind. What if this wasn't just a random act of joy? What if there was something more to it, something deeper, more meaningful? Unbeknownst to Clara, the flash mob was far from spontaneous. And it wasn't just an ordinary dance. This was the beginning of something much larger, a movement that would change the lives of those involved in ways they couldn't yet understand. As the music swelled to its crescendo, Clara's eyes caught sight of one figure at the edge of the crowd, someone who seemed to be orchestrating the entire performance. The person was standing apart from the dancers, their expression focused, calculating, almost like a puppeteer pulling the strings. Clara's instincts told her there was something more to this than just a well-rehearsed show. And when the music ended and the crowd erupted in applause, that feeling only deepened. The performance was over, but the questions had only just begun. As Clara stood there, amidst the fading echoes of applause, her mind raced. The flash mob had been everything she imagined it to be, magical, exhilarating, and completely unexpected. Yet, beneath the rush of excitement, a strange sense of unease lingered in the pit of her stomach. Something about the way the dancers had moved, their synchronization so perfect, the way they had appeared almost out of thin air, it felt too planned, too precise to be spontaneous. She looked around at the crowd, still buzzing from the performance, but her gaze locked on that one person standing at the edge, standing so far apart from the dancers, almost like they were waiting for something. The person was tall, their figure shrouded in the shadow of a nearby building, but Clara could make out the sharp lines of their silhouette. Her instincts told her there was something more to this event, something hidden beneath the surface of the spontaneous flash mob. Her heart pounded as she pushed through the crowd, determined to get closer. She moved swiftly, her eyes never leaving the figure. Whoever they were, they had orchestrated this whole thing. And Clara needed to know why. Just as she was about to reach the figure, the crowd around her began to shift. People were dispersing, headed back to their daily lives, their phones still raised as they shared clips of the performance with their friends and family. It seemed like the moment was over. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding right before her eyes. She reached the edge of the crowd, only to find that the mysterious figure had vanished. Damn it, Clara muttered under her breath. She'd been so close. She glanced around, trying to spot any sign of the figure, but there was nothing, just the hustle of the London streets, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. She felt a pang of frustration. Clara, a voice called, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Emily weaving her way through the crowd, a bright smile on her face. Clara let out a sigh of relief and waved her friend over. Emily had been the one to convince her to meet up today. It had been weeks since they'd last caught up, and despite the odd tension Clara had felt during the flash mob, she was happy to see her friend. She needed to ground herself, to shift her focus away from the strange event. "Hey, that was amazing, wasn't it?" Emily asked, practically bouncing on her feet. Clara forced a smile. "Yeah, it was incredible." Emily tilted her head, noticing the hesitance in Clara's voice. "You okay? You seem off." "I don't know. It's just it felt too perfect, you know? Like there was something more to it." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Like what? A hidden agenda?" "I don't know. It sounds crazy, but I swear there was someone orchestrating it. Someone standing on the sidelines, watching. It didn't feel like a random flash mob." "Okay, now I know you're overthinking it," Emily said with a laugh. You've been reading too many conspiracy theories. It was just a fun, spontaneous thing. People love flash mobs. That's all it was. Clara wasn't convinced. She couldn't shake the image of that figure standing in the shadows, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something more at play. But before she could say anything more, Emily pulled out her phone. "Hey, I've got to show you something," Emily said, swiping through her screen. "I caught part of the flash mob on video. You have to see it." Clara half-heartedly leaned over to watch. But as she did, something caught her eye in the background of Emily's video. A familiar face. The figure. It was subtle, just a fleeting glimpse of someone at the very edge of the crowd, but Clara's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, the shadowed figure, just like she had seen before. It was the same person. Clara's mind raced. There was no way this was a coincidence. Her instincts had been right. "Emily, rewind that," Clara said urgently. "Do you see that person?" At the edge of the crowd, Emily squinted at the screen. I think so, but so what? It's probably just another bystander." "No, it's not. I swear it's the same person I saw earlier. The one standing off to the side, like they were directing everything." Emily frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Clara, you're freaking out. It's probably just someone who is part of the crowd." Clara's frustration mounted. "I'm not making this up. Something is going on, and I need to find out what." Before Emily could respond, Clara stood up abruptly, her decision made. She had to know more. This was no longer just about a fun afternoon. It was about uncovering the truth behind the flash mob, the person behind the curtain. "Where are you going?" Emily called after her, but Clara didn't stop. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like the answers were just within her reach. She had to keep pushing forward, even if no one else believed her. Meanwhile, across town, another figure was already deep into the web of secrets surrounding the flash mob. Ethan Moore was a freelance journalist who had been in London for just a few weeks, covering everything from street art to underground music scenes. He had an eye for stories that the public wasn't yet aware of, a nose for the kind of intrigue that simmered beneath the surface of the ordinary. When he had first seen the flash mob unfold, he had been intrigued, as any good journalist would be. He'd been watching from a distance, tucked in a corner of the street, scribbling notes in his notepad. The dancers were impressive, yes, but there was something about the choreography that seemed too rehearsed for a random flash mob. The way they moved in perfect unison, the way they melted into the crowd afterward. It all felt too orchestrated. Ethan's gut told him there was a story here, something deeper than just a viral video. And as the crowd began to disperse, he, too, found himself looking for that one figure who had been watching it all from the sidelines. He wasn't surprised when he spotted the person again. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a long coat that barely flinched as they navigated through the crowds, this person was no casual observer. Ethan had seen enough to know that. He decided to follow. Back at Clara's flat that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced out the window, she felt eyes on her, and the mysterious figures she had seen earlier kept flashing in her mind. After hours of searching the internet, Clara found something that made her blood run cold. The flash mob, it seemed, wasn't a spontaneous act at all. A group of videos had surfaced online, but they weren't just ordinary clips. They were linked to a new social movement, one that was growing rapidly behind the scenes. The flash mob was part of something much larger, a network of highly organized events meant to send a message to the world. The message? A call for unity in a world that was increasingly divided. But it wasn't just a feel-good movement. The deeper Clara dug, the more she realized this wasn't just a group of dancers trying to spread joy. It was a coordinated effort by a shadow organization with an agenda far beyond the typical flash mob. They had the resources, the people, and the will to make their presence known. But who were they, and what did they want? As Clara's investigation deepened, the stakes grew higher. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. Clara was no longer just a spectator. She was caught up in something much bigger, something she couldn't easily escape from. And as the twists of the story began to unravel, Clara realized she wasn't the only one looking for answers. In a city full of secrets, the flash mob was just the beginning. Clara's pulse quickened as she stood in front of the dilapidated warehouse, a place she had never imagined herself in. Yet here she was. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket, the screen lighting up with messages from Emily, who had been frantically texting her ever since Clara had gone dark for hours. She ignored them. There was no time for distractions now. The deeper Clara dug into the flash mob's origins, the more she realized how much danger was now surrounding her. The organization behind the flash mob was powerful, and they would stop at nothing to keep their agenda hidden. Her eyes scanned the dark alleyway leading up to the warehouse's entrance. A few straggling figures loitered in the shadows, moving quickly when they noticed Clara. She could feel them watching her. But Clara didn't stop. She couldn't. Not when she was this close to the truth. This was it. The answer to the strange, unsettling feelings she had experienced since the mob's performance, the shadowed figure she had seen at the edge of the crowd, and the whispers she had heard about a coordinated underground movement. This warehouse, hidden from the public eye, was the heart of it all. The place where the enigmatic organizers were running their operations. Clara wasn't alone. Ethan Moore had arrived earlier and was waiting inside, his presence a subtle yet constant reminder that they were both racing against time. As a journalist, Ethan had taken the same path, following the breadcrumbs that Clara had discovered earlier. They had agreed to meet up here, to share what they knew, and to finally uncover the truth. But Clara wasn't sure how much of the story was still hidden from them. She didn't know who they were up against, who exactly was pulling the strings. With a deep breath, Clara approached the warehouse. The old wooden door creaked open with a low moan when she pushed on it, its hinges long rusted from years of neglect. Inside, the dim lighting cast long shadows across the concrete floors, and she could hear the faint hum of conversation. People were here, gathering in small groups, most of them cloaked in secrecy, their identities obscured by masks and hoods. A chill ran down Clara's spine. This wasn't just a simple movement. This was an underground network of people working to control and manipulate something far bigger than a viral flash mob. Ethan caught sight of her as she stepped deeper into the room. His face was tense, the lines of exhaustion under his eyes telling the story of his own sleepless nights spent investigating. "Clara," Ethan greeted her, his voice low. "You made it. This is where it all started. This is the nerve center." Clara's gaze moved across the room, her mind racing. It looked like a war room, dark, unmarked, and filled with people whose faces remained hidden. A large table at the center of the room displayed maps of London, pins marking various locations where past flash mobs had occurred. But something was off. These weren't just events for fun. There was an underlying, methodical strategy at play. Clara's instinct screamed at her that they were not just organizing flash mobs, they were orchestrating a movement, a dangerous one. "They're everywhere," Ethan said, reading Clara's expression. "The people behind this aren't just interested in performing. They want something bigger, control. They want to rally people. They've been organizing flash mobs, but they have a far-reaching agenda. They want to disrupt cities, create chaos, change the narrative." Clara's heart raced. She had suspected it all along. This wasn't just a harmless performance. These mobs were a distraction, a way to rally the masses, to create disorder in the most unsuspecting places.
Why?
"What do they want?" Clara asked, trying to process it all. "I've been digging, but I can't get a straight answer." "They're careful," Ethan explained. "But one thing's clear, they're planning something massive. A final event. This flash mob we saw? It's just the tip of the iceberg." Clara's eyes narrowed. "And we're here to stop it?" Ethan gave a grim nod. "We have to. We're the only ones who know what's going on. If we don't act, it'll be too late." As if on cue, the door at the far side of the room creaked open, and a tall figure entered, their face concealed by a black mask. The room immediately fell silent, all eyes shifting toward the newcomer. Clara's breath hitched. This was the person she had seen in the crowd at the flash mob. The same figure who had watched everything from the shadows. The figure stepped forward, and the air seemed to grow thick with tension. "You're not supposed to be here," the masked person said, their voice distorted. "This is bigger than you both realize." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The voice was unmistakable, yet impossible to place. She had heard it before. It was the same voice that had whispered through her mind when she first caught sight of the flash mob's orchestrator. This person had been pulling the strings from the beginning. But who were they? Ethan took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the masked figure. "We know what you're planning. We're not going to let you carry it out." The figure let out a laugh, a cold, hollow sound that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "You think you can stop this? You think you can undo what's been set into motion?" Clara's mind raced. "Who are you?" The figure slowly removed their mask, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign at the same time. It was someone Clara had seen before, a person she'd once admired, someone who had been a part of her world in ways she hadn't even realized. The figure was none other than Laura Matthews, a former social activist who had disappeared from public view years ago. She had once been the face of progressive movements in London, advocating for equality and social justice. But now, she was standing before Clara, a leader of this shadow organization, manipulating events to serve her own mysterious agenda. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Laura's?" Lara's lips curled into a cold smile. "You never saw it coming, did you? You thought I disappeared. But I've been right here, all along, watching, waiting. You were always too busy trying to figure out the flash mobs to see the bigger picture. You're just a small part of it, Clara. A cog in the machine. And now it's too late for you." The room seemed to close in around Clara. She could feel the walls tightening, the weight of Lara's words sinking in. She had been right about one thing. This was all part of something far bigger than just a flash mob. But it was more than a simple disruption. It was a calculated effort to spark social unrest, to control the narrative, and to manipulate the masses. But Clara wasn't going down without a fight. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice strong. "It's not too late. We can stop this. I won't let you control the city, or the people." Lara's smile widened, almost sadistically. "You don't have the power to stop anything. You're too small. Too insignificant." Clara locked eyes with Ethan, a silent understanding passing between them. They couldn't let Lara win. They couldn't let this dark plan unfold any further. "Do you think the people are just going to follow your every move?" Clara shouted, her voice ringing with defiance. "The truth will come out. The people will see what you're trying to do. You can't control everything." Lara's expression faltered for just a moment, and in that split second, Clara knew she had reached her. "You're not the only one who has a following," Clara said. "People are waking up. And when they do, you'll have no one left to manipulate." A dangerous silence fell over the room, and the tension was palpable. Lara's eyes narrowed, her hand slowly reaching into her coat. For a moment, Clara thought the confrontation would escalate to violence. But then something unexpected happened. Lara lowered her hand and turned to face the group of people gathered in the room. "She's right," Lara said, her voice quiet but laced with a strange authority. "It's time to end this." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's heart raced as she tried to make sense of Lara's words. Was this an acknowledgement of defeat? Or was it part of a larger plan? The truth was, Clara had no idea what would happen next. But one thing was clear. The final flash mob had begun, and this time, the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The tension in the warehouse hung like a thick fog, heavy and suffocating. Clara's heart raced as she stood face to face with Laura Matthews, the leader of the underground movement, who had once been a beacon of hope in the world of social justice. But now, she had become a master manipulator, using her talents to control, disrupt, and incite unrest in the city. Clara could feel the weight of the moment. This was it, the final showdown. She wasn't sure how much time they had, but she knew one thing. She couldn't back down now. The stakes were too high. The room was silent, the gathered crowd waiting for Lara's next move. Clara could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Some of them were here because they believed in the cause, while others had been drawn in by the idea of something bigger. But they were all at a crossroads now. Lara's influence had been undeniable, but the truth was beginning to seep through the cracks, and Clara was determined to expose it. Ethan, standing beside her, glanced over at Clara, his eyes filled with determination. "We can't let her win," he whispered. "We have to stop her. For the sake of London, and for the people who are still in the dark." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. The flash mobs were just the beginning. The chaos they had unleashed was only a prelude to something much larger, something that threatened to engulf the city if Lara wasn't stopped. Lara seemed to read the thoughts flashing across Clara's mind. Her lips curled into a smirk as she stepped back, giving a subtle signal to the people standing in the shadows. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't afford to let Lara gain any more ground. "This is it," Lara said softly, her voice now almost melancholic. "I knew this day would come. You've both been persistent. But you don't understand the bigger picture." Clara's voice was steady, but filled with conviction.
"No, Lara.
"You don't understand. You've manipulated so many people into thinking they were fighting for a cause. But you're not just disrupting society. You're breaking it down from the inside. You're using them as pawns in your twisted game." Lara's expression darkened, but her voice remained eerily calm. "You have no idea what it's like, do you? To fight for change in a world that's so broken? The system is corrupt, Clara. And when the system fails you, sometimes you have to break it, tear it down, and rebuild it from the ground up." Clara shook her head.
"No.
Change doesn't come through chaos and destruction. It comes from understanding, compassion, and collaboration. You've lost sight of that. You've lost sight of everything you once stood for." Lara's eyes narrowed. "I haven't lost sight of anything. I've simply learned that in order to make a difference, you have to be willing to do whatever it takes." The air seemed to crackle with tension. Clara stepped forward, locking eyes with Lara.
"No.
"You've lost yourself. You've become what you once fought against." A faint ripple of uncertainty passed over Lara's face, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She straightened, her shoulders squared, her gaze hardening. "It's too late, Clara. You're too late. I've already set things in motion." Just as Lara spoke, the room seemed to shift. The atmosphere changed, subtle but undeniable. Clara could feel it. The power was no longer in Lara's hands. The people standing in the shadows were starting to question her. Doubt was creeping into their minds. Clara had planted the seed. In that moment, Clara realized that Lara's power wasn't as absolute as she had thought. It was based on manipulation and fear, not on the strength of a genuine cause. The people had been deceived, but they were not lost. They could still be reached, still be brought back from the edge. Clara turned to the group of individuals who had gathered, their faces now unmasked, their identities exposed. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the momentary hesitation. They were torn between the influence they had once felt and the growing realization that they were part of something darker than they had ever imagined. "You don't have to follow her," Clara said, her voice steady but filled with warmth. "You don't have to be part of this. You're not alone. You can make a real difference without tearing everything down. You can rebuild it. Together." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, one by one, the people began to shift. A woman near the back stepped forward, her face a mixture of confusion and regret. "What have we done?" she whispered. Clara smiled gently. "You haven't done anything yet. It's not too late to walk away." Ethan stepped forward as well, his voice clear and strong. "You have a choice. You can walk out of this room right now and start over. You don't have to be a part of this anymore." Lara's eyes flickered with anger, but Clara could see the cracks forming in her control. The seeds of doubt were sprouting, and there was nothing Lara could do to stop it. Clara took a step closer to Lara. "It's over. You can't keep hiding behind fear and manipulation. The truth is out. The people will see what you've been doing, and they won't let you control them any longer." For a moment, Lara seemed to falter. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. But then she straightened, her face regaining its cold composure. "You think this is over? You think you've won? This is just the beginning." Clara shook her head.
"No.
"It ends here." With that, Clara turned to the group of people, her voice now strong and filled with purpose. "You have the power to change things. Not through violence or manipulation, but through unity, understanding, and a shared vision for a better future. This is your chance to make things right. One by one, people began to step forward, moving away from Laura and towards Clara and Ethan. The realization had hit them. They had been part of something that didn't align with their values, something that wasn't about true change. They had been pawns in a dangerous game, but now they were reclaiming their own power. Laura watched, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief as her followers turned their backs on her. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice laced with venom. Clara stood tall, unflinching.
No, Laura.
"You will regret this." With that, Laura turned on her heel and stormed out of the warehouse, her exit as dramatic as her entrance. The tension that had filled the room began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief. The people who had followed her, who had been part of the flash mobs, now understood the truth. They had been caught in a web of lies, but now they were free. In the weeks that followed, Clara and Ethan worked tirelessly to expose Lara's plans to the public. The truth about the flash mobs, the underground organization, and the manipulation that had been taking place was revealed. The city of London, once on the brink of chaos, began to heal. The people who had been caught up in the movement began to rebuild their lives, and many of them joined Clara and Ethan in their efforts to create real, positive change. The final flash mob, a carefully orchestrated event that was meant to spark a wave of unrest, never happened. Instead, Londoners gathered for a peaceful demonstration of unity and hope. Clara and Ethan stood at the front, watching as the city came together to take a stand for something better. The flash mobs had started as a symbol of disruption, but in the end, they became a catalyst for real change. Clara had found her voice, and with it, she had helped lead the city back from the edge of destruction. As she looked out over the crowd, Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey had been long, and at times, it had seemed impossible. But in the end, they had won, not through force, but through the power of truth and unity. And that was the greatest victory of all.